Hello, everybody. I'm going to give it about a minute here to let some people filter in, and then we'll get started pretty soon.
Just want to say before we get involved, the only place that my computer has access in my house is still just one of the worst like areas to my router. So if I'm reconnecting for a moment or off my computer, that's the only issue. I'm just trying to find the best possible connection. Did you hear any of that?
I did not.
Okay. I
Sorry,
just
what's
wanted
up,
to
Zach?
the only place that I have access in my house to Zoom right now with my computer is still like the worst Wi-Fi in this house. Like it's basically impossible for me to have a connection with video and still hear everything in context. So if I'm also breaking up for a moment, that's the only reason why I'm just trying to find the most apt area to listen.
Okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know.
Absolutely.
You too. I have that, so I don't really have that good internet either from where I'm located.
Okay. Well, I am in the same boat, sort of. Um, and excuse me, I'm setting an alarm so I don't run over time here. So you might say, "Hey, that looks like a different room that you're in," which you're not wrong. So I can't remember which class I've told these things to, like your papa. I forget who I tell my stories to. Uh, Back in March, my wife and my daughter and I bugged out to Indiana for a whole lot of reasons. COVID was probably the biggest. But we are currently living with my mother-in-law. Last night, we had a pretty decent storm, knocked over some power lines, and apparently cut our internet as well. At least we woke up this morning and didn't have internet. So I relocated to my wife's friend's house that has Wi-Fi and cats. So I feel your internet pain.
I also have a cat with me.
But let me put up a chat announcement here. Okay, so we're gonna get started here. Just kind of a heads up that at the beginning of each class, I'll try to put up in the chat a little agenda. So if you come late, kind of know what we're going to be talking about. And it's a way for me to like remember to tell you stuff. Also, be aware that this is being recorded. So if you are on camera and you don't have a shirt on, maybe think about putting a shirt on. But more importantly, if you do miss class or miss part of a class, these are going to be put up on my YouTube page at least by the end of the week. It probably won't be like right after this class. But just be aware that you are being recorded. But let's start with announcements, and most of the time this will take the form of me reminding you about something I posted on Brightspace. So let me go to Brightspace here. So I put this up yesterday. One of your classmates let me know that my point totaling was different on the syllabus than it is in Brightspace. I think what the issue was I imported a bunch of content from old classes, but didn't total up the grades correctly or something like that. But at any rate, this is the revised point breakdown. We still have the same number of assignments. We still have the same point values for that. I think what I didn't do was total the total points correctly. But long story short, this is your correct point breakdown and number of assignments and what equals an A, what equals a B, etc. And I've updated that in the syllabus as well and reposted that. Another big important thing to point out, I've had a bunch of questions about the textbook, specifically the ebook. A lot of you haven't gotten it or haven't had access to it. So I called the bookstore, and here's what I know. In order to access your ebook, if you bought a virtual version of the book, once you've purchased the book, you should have a section in Brightspace called My Bookshelf that has all of your virtual textbooks for any class that you signed up for. But calling the bookstore, I found out that there is a problem with the publisher of our book. So it's not a bookstore problem, it's a bigger publisher problem. They are aware of it, they are trying to fix it. But you might be saying, well, what do I do now? If you bought an ebook, you can go to the bookstore to get a refund and then purchase a rented physical textbook as a way of having the book. You might also say, well, what if I need to get a hold of the bookstore? And one of my classes, maybe it was this one, I had a student say that they were on hold for like 2 hours with the bookstore. Don't call them is the biggest piece of advice I got. You should email them. That's a quicker way to get a hold of them. bookstore@pstcc.edu. All of their employees have access to that email, and they check it really often every day. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of them. So you might be saying, well, what the heck are we going to do about this discussion? I still don't have the book. I can't get to the bookstore, whatever. I'm extending the deadline for our first quiz and our first discussion until Sunday, September 13th. So about an extra week or so, a little bit more than a week. Keep in mind, this doesn't affect any future assignment. All of our quizzes, discussions after these first two, so quizzes 2 through 5, discussion 2 through 5, midterm, final, none of that changes. This just affects the first quiz and the first discussion. So questions about the first discussion or the textbook or kind of logistics with that?
Professor?
Yeah, Jose, what's up?
So I'm not sure if this is the right textbook or not, so I'm just going to show you. Okay. I don't know how to do it.
It should be, if you're on your computer, bottom of your screen, bottom left, there's a microphone icon and a camera icon to toggle on and off your microphone and your camera.
Okay, second. Okay, hold on.
Well, tell you what, Jose, I've got office hours right after this class.
It's this one.
Oh, okay. That is not the correct textbook. That
not-
is the correct textbook. It's an earlier edition.
Will it work?
I cannot guarantee what documents are in that book. That is probably the biggest difference, if there is a difference in the versions of the book. So
Gotcha.
I would strongly suggest getting the newest version.
Got it. We'll do. Thank you, Professor.
Yep.
I had a question.
Sorry, who had a question?
I did.
Yeah, Dylan, what's up?
Are we gonna be going over like the stuff we need to know for like the quiz like on Zoom, or do we have to read for the stuff ourselves?
Good question. So the quizzes are exclusively based on the textbook. That'll be something that you'll need to read and study for. So we won't cover like a quiz review or something like that.
Okay. And like, how many questions are those?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's like 10 multiple choice, 10 true and false. I don't recall off the top of my head though.
Yes.
And I had a question too.
Yeah.
Is there going to be like a time limit on how long that we have to complete the quizzes, or do we have as much time as we want?
There is a time limit. I believe it's either an hour or an hour and a half. Let me actually go into a quiz super quick for the sake of not telling you incorrect information. Wait for Brightspace to load. Okay. So the number of questions Yeah, 10 true and false, 10 multiple choice questions, and then time limit. Time limit is time limit is 30 minutes. I was wrong. So 10 true and false, 10 multiple choice, 30 minutes. Okay, other questions about the textbook, about the first discussion assignment, kind of schedule change, any of that?
So we're only meeting on Thursdays, correct?
As far as I know, let me see how today goes. Let me see how next week goes. If I'm still super behind or you all have questions, I might add some time on Tuesdays. But for this week and next week, we're just meeting on Thursdays.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, other questions before we move on? Cool. So real quick, for the sake of kind of organization, I had kind of a crazy freewheeling class right before this. Rather than everybody kind of chiming in all at once, and then I got to figure out who like is saying stuff. You all should have a feature to raise a hand, which sends me an alert that you've raised your hand. If you go to the participants icon at the bottom of your screen, if you're on desktop, there should be, if you click on that, there should be an option for like raise a hand, ask a question, there's a couple other things. That's going to be the easiest way for us to kind of triage who's going to answer a question or talk or whatever. So let's see. We talked about, let's see. We talked about the change schedule. We talked about textbook stuff. I think that's the only bit of business to cover. Okay, then we're going to just jump right in to our first lecture. Super duper quick. I think I did this in my first class. Let me make sure I do it in this class. I'm going to upload the PowerPoint right now as we speak. If you want to download that, follow along, take notes, that is entirely up to you. So let me get this out for you. So our first chapter we're covering is chapter 12. And that should be up. Okay, so first PowerPoint is up here, again under content, and then PowerPoint's here. So the first chapter we are covering, chapter 12, it's called Contact, Commerce, and Colonies, and is, you know, if you really want to kind of get into it, it's kind of an arbitrary starting point. If you like dates and you want some kind of firm, like here's where we are, 1400 is roughly the year we're starting in. And I say roughly because that's sort of the nature of a class like this. We're going to be plus or minus a couple decades, but I know that I like, you know, something I can kind of pin into and say, okay, here's where we're starting. So 1400, again, is sort of an arbitrary choice, but it is leading us into a discussion about this event referred to as the Columbian Exchange. And we're going to talk about what that is a little bit later. But it is this meeting of different cultures. It is a mixing of peoples who had very limited contact before that, and kind of what comes out after that contact. But first, we're going to be looking at these societies in isolation a little bit. So we'll start with, we're starting with Europe and its expansion outside of Europe and exploration. We'll look at some of the technology associated with that. We'll look at the motivation behind some of that. And then we'll touch on the Columbian Exchange itself, what it is, what kind of changes it causes. We'll stick with Europe a little bit more and look at the Protestant Reformation. And then we'll end with China and the kind of nature of this class and the book itself is that it tends to kind of introduce an idea at the end of a chapter and then pick it up right at the beginning of the next chapter. So we'll end with China in this chapter and then pick up with China again in the next chapter. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is this isn't going to be like a U.S. history class, obviously, but it's different in that we're looking at many, many different countries. So we're going to be jumping around a lot geographically. So some weeks we'll focus a lot on Europe. Some weeks we won't really focus on anything with Europe. So we'll kind of be moving around quite a bit. But let's start with European exploration and really the motivation behind that. The kind of why and then the how a little bit. So one of the main motivating factors for European expansion is trade, specifically a desire for silk, gold, and spices. Now, keep in mind, terminology is really important. And the kind of words we use are really important as well. Trade is kind of a mushy word, meaning it sounds nice, but if you really kind of dig into it, it's a little more dark, let's say. So, okay, what Europeans are mostly interested in is silk, gold, and spices. Okay, so does that mean that in 1400, January 1st, 1400, somebody said, oh gosh, we need silk and gold and spices? No, obviously not. Europeans knew about these things and had access to silk and gold and spices before 1400, but it wasn't easy to get. The main way you would get these very valuable and very rare things was largely through trade and business along the Silk Road. So this is a map of the Silk Road. It is really a connection of trade routes that connect China with India and the Middle East and Europe. But again, we're not talking about some kind of like literal paved road. This is not I-75. This is, a reliable path through parts of the northern India or central China, and multiple legs in this journey. So if I wanted, a silk bow tie from China in 1350, I'd have to get it along the Silk Road. And to do that, I have to pay 5 or 6 or 7 people to transport that single bow tie or a bunch of bow ties all the way to me in Italy, let's say. So that takes a long time. That takes several months, maybe a whole year. That takes a lot of people. So I got to pay a bunch of people to do it. And it's not always very reliable because if you're going through part of China or India or the Ottoman Empire, they might not always let you travel through their territory, or they might tack on a huge tax to transport that product. So I could get that bow tie, but it's going to be pretty hard to do. So if I want access to that stuff, I got to pay somebody to do it. I got to wait a lot of time. And European governments by 1400 start to say, well, how can we get that stuff faster and cheaper? And that is the motivating factor here. We're not talking about some kind of like Star Trek mission statement to boldly go where no one's gone before, to explore new life and new civilizations. It's how do we get this really expensive thing we want quickly and cheaply? So that's the motivator, right? It's the product. It's the thing we want that we can get in large quantities that we can sell back in Europe. So that's one piece of the puzzle, is the motivation, right? But then you got to actually be able to get all the way to China or India. And going over land is a drag. It takes a long time to do. So how can we get there quickly, more quickly? You could go over land, right, through on that red part of the route, but that takes forever. Or you could find a way through the Mediterranean down into the Indian Ocean. That would be a little quicker, but that's still, a pretty far distance. What if we sailed around Africa? Maybe that would be a quicker way to parts of India or China. So that eventually becomes the goal. Can we either sail around Africa or like cut through part of Africa to avoid this longer Silk Road route? So if we're going to do that, if we're going to sail around parts of Africa or parts of the Atlantic Ocean, we need ships to do it, right? But what most European nations would have in 1400 are not really big ships. I'm not going to spend time on ancient navigation, the bullet point we have here, but I do want to highlight the kind of ship we'd be talking about around 1400. It would be something like a Norse longship. Now, of course, this is one ship in one country. There's a lot of variations on this type of ship, but this is what a lot of European nations would have in the early 1400s, is a big long ship that's relatively flat that has one big sail. So, I mean, this serves a purpose. You can sail long distances on a ship like this, but it's a pretty small crew. It's 20, 30, maybe 40 people. It only has one sail, so it can only really catch so much wind and can only go so fast. And it's, it turns like a boat. It doesn't turn easily. It's not that fast. There's a lot of downsides to a ship like this. So European nations start saying, well, how can we build better ships or different kinds of ships that let us sail different ways or longer distances? And the European nation that really has the kind of monopoly on shipbuilding especially will be the Portuguese. So let's talk about the Portuguese for a second. Their leader, Henry the Navigator, their king, in the 14 teens and 1420s, decides to sink a lot of money into shipbuilding, technology surrounding shipbuilding, and the study of geography. So he's not the guy going out and exploring. He's not climbing onto a ship and sailing to China. But he is going to say, let's put all of these resources into this kind of knowledge base that we're going to develop. And that's really important, because knowing something is often more important than actually having the ship or the map or something. But let's focus on shipbuilding for a second. The Portuguese will have some of the most advanced ships in Europe in the early 15th century. Two ships in particular I want to highlight are ships that you've seen before, or at least familiar with. The Santa Maria is a Portuguese-designed carrack. The carrack is the type of ship that it is. So let me step back for a second. Let me let you all chime in here for a minute. What is different between this ship and the Norse longship that we saw a couple minutes ago?
You can already tell there's more room for supplies. Like the Norse longship to me seems like it's built for more like to explore, but there's not much for functionality. Like it seems like it could carry a lot of men and a lot of soldiers, but not necessarily a lot of food or a lot of supplies, or if you're going through a particularly rough part of the ocean, it doesn't seem very sturdy. Whereas like the other boat we're looking at now, obviously you can tell it has a lot more like just density to it, and you could tell that there's room to prepare more, honestly.
Yeah. So it's bigger, right? There's more storage, there's more space. A ship like this, hold on one second. I have a cat. I don't remember the name of this cat. It's my wife's friend's cat. Hi. Oh God. Oh,
Cute.
God. Ow, 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 ow. Okay. Don't pick up the cat. Pro tip. So, a ship like this, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good.
So a ship like this, like the Carrack, is clearly bigger than our Norse Long ship. This would be a ship that has a crew of about 50 people. Its hull length is about 62 feet. So to give you some perspective there, that's about 2 football fields in length. And this has a lot of different sails, right? So what kind of advantage would we have with a ship that has a lot of different types of sails, multiple sails? Amanda has her hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, you're going to be able to travel a lot faster because you're going to be able to capture a lot more wind. So definitely that will help them with getting there faster. Maybe help with turning as well.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So this ship can go faster. It's got more sails to catch more wind. You can configure them in different ways to be able to maneuver this ship a little better, to turn it a little easier. And like we said, it's bigger, right? So there's room for storage for whatever product, whatever thing you're going to bring back. The crew has more room for supplies, so that means this can travel for more time. So it's just all around more advantageous than our ship, like our Norse Long ship. Another Portuguese designed ship, again, one that you're probably a little familiar with, Columbus will sail the Nina and the Pinta that are both Portuguese designed caravels. So these are a little smaller. They're 50 feet in length. They would have had a crew of about 24 or 25, but these are a lot more maneuverable. Think of these like the sports cars of sailing ships. They can make quick turns. They can go a little faster, but they serve the same kind of purpose. You can travel a long distance. You can go pretty quickly in a ship like this. So these sorts of design of ships let you travel a long distance, right? You're going to go across the Atlantic Ocean on something like a carrack or a caravel. So that's the next part of our puzzle piece. We've got the motivation. We've got the ships that can carry us someplace. Then we need knowledge, because you don't want to just sail off into the middle of nowhere, right? The Portuguese will further innovate through the production of very, very accurate maps, not just of land, but of ocean, regions of the ocean as well. This kind of knowledge was critically important for the Portuguese, so much so that it was illegal to sell a Portuguese-made map outside of Portugal, because they wanted this kind of knowledge contained. But probably the biggest advantage, even besides kind of geography knowledge, that the Portuguese will have is knowledge of ocean currents and wind patterns, kind of how they move and where they are located. One element of that I want to highlight is what the Portuguese call volta de mar. Translated from Portuguese, that means turning of the ocean. So what volta de mar really is this knowledge that the Portuguese have of how wind patterns and ocean currents work. Okay, you say, well, who cares, right? I'm not here to watch the Weather Channel. But this really is important. If we kind of illustrate this with a map, that might be a little easier to understand. This is a map of part of the Volta de Mar. And what it is illustrating with the blue arrows and the green arrows are ocean current patterns and wind patterns. Okay, so again, you're probably saying, who cares? Big deal. But if I were a sailor in Europe in 1400, and I wanted to sail from Lagos up in northern southwestern Spain, all the way down to Arguin on the African coast. Let me see if I can do something cool here. Not that. I mean, Vasco da Gama is kind of cool, but that's not the cool thing I want to do. I think, let's see. I think I can do a highlighter. Hey, okay. So let's say I want to go from Lagos up here all the way down to Arguin. If I were a traditional European sailor, I'd travel from Lagos up here and really hug the coastline once I get kind of into part of Africa here. Why do I want to stay so close to the coastline like this? Anybody know? Why is it super important as a sailor to be close to the coastline?
You can
More
have
likely to
access.
get there quicker.
I heard a couple people. Anybody? Well, okay. Dakota, Dakota has their hand up.
It's just like easy transportation, and they're always on a boat, so come in and out of land, transport what they need to transport, and get out.
Okay, yeah, it's the logistics of it are a little bit easier. Has anybody sailed before? Been on a boat?
On a cruise ship.
Who said they were on a cruise ship?
Tyler.
Tyler, where was your cruise ship? Like, where'd you go?
We went to Cozumel, New Mexico.
Okay.
Or Cozumel, yeah.
Okay. Were you out in open ocean at all?
A few times, but not like all the time.
Okay. What's it like when you're out in the open ocean? There's no land anywhere.
It's scary because you're stuck in the middle of the ocean, but it's you don't see anything, so I mean, you don't really know which way you're going because you don't really have any landmarks or anything to base off.
Yeah, right. There's no way to know which way is north, south, east, west, right? Now, obviously today, like we've got GPS and stuff, but
yeah,
if you're a sailor in the 15th century, you have to hug that coastline, because if you sail off into the Atlantic, you're screwed. You don't know where you are. You don't have GPS. You might not have a reliable map. You have very, very sketchy ways of navigating your way. So you have to be close to that coastline. And then you want to do the same thing going back, but you can't sail up against this wind current. You'll just keep getting pushed in the opposite direction. So if you're going to sail back, you have to do something called tacking, where you kind of go out, and then come back in, go back out and back in. And that lets you eventually kind of zigzag your way back to the coastline. So that's what you do, around 1400, that's what most sailors would have done. But the Portuguese say, no. We got this thing called Volta de Mar. We know which way the ocean kind of moves and which way the wind patterns move. And because we know that, we can do something crazy. We can navigate all the way down to Arguin, then we can sail away from land. And that's crazy, right? You're out in open ocean. How the heck do you know where you're going to go? But I can't remember the meme, the Eddie Murphy meme. They know that if they sail far enough west and then a little north, they'll get pushed back towards the mainland. So that kind of reliable, predictable knowledge gives them a massive advantage to where they can travel to a place like Arguin pretty quickly and back in like half the time. So the Portuguese have these kind of three puzzle pieces at this point. They know they can predictably sail certain distances and get back home without dying. They have ships that can carry them there, and then of course they have this motivation, reason to even sail beyond Europe. So next, I want to talk about kind of the next step in this, the kind of the benefactors of some of this kind of motivation and knowledge. Before we jump into that, the questions at this point, I know we just covered a whole lot of stuff surrounding the Portuguese especially. Are there questions about any of the terms we used? I'll re-explain something if you need something re-explained. No. Okay. Silence means no. Cool. So if we're talking about European explorers, there's a whole host that we could talk about, but I want to focus on one as sort of our case study. When we talk about European explorers, what name probably comes into your head right away?
Columbus.
Somebody said Columbus. Good. Okay, so Christopher Columbus, let's start there. What do you know about Christopher Columbus? What's he known for? What's he famous for?
In 1492, he sailed the ocean blue, right?
In 1492, he sailed. Yeah, that. Where was he going?
He was trying to go to India, but he wound up here.
Where's here? East Tennessee.
Well, just America as a whole.
Okay.
Or North America.
Okay, so supposed to go to China or India, ended up in North America. So some of that is accurate, but let's kind of talk about him as a person and what we know factually about Columbus, and then the bigger question I want to address. Get this to come up. The bigger question I want to address is, what is he interested in? A little bit in a couple minutes, we're going to look at some entries from a diary that he kept. So kind of keep this in your head here. What is he interested in? I skipped a couple of slides here about da Gama. I'm not going to talk about Vasco da Gama. I'm not going to expect you to know about da Gama. We're going to jump right to Columbus. Okay, so a couple things first. Christopher Columbus is an Italian merchant, and that's a fancy term for he imported and exported stuff. He's the middleman. He's one of the middlemen who would have brought stuff in from the Silk Road. But he exists after the Silk Road. So he's this business person. His kind of livelihood is tied up in, how do I get stuff quickly and cheaply to sell it? And he will also be pretty well educated. For a person in the 15th century, he studied a lot of geography, and what maps he owned and what knowledge he had was as accurate as you could get. And with his own kind of study, he theorized that you could sail west from Europe to get to China or India. So rather than having to go let me go back here. Rather than having to go all the way across the Silk Roads, right, where you got to go all the way over Europe or even down into the Indian Ocean, you don't have to do any of that. You don't have to go all the way around Africa like da Gama will eventually do. Columbus says, no, you can just sail west from Asia. Let's see if I can do the cool fancy thing again. Not that. That's not cool and fancy. This, he says, if you can just sail west from Europe this way and get to China and Asia like in half the time. You don't have to go over Europe. You don't have to go around Africa. Just go west, and that'll be a quicker route. So he basically sells this. Think of him like a pitch man, like a ShamWow guy selling you something. He goes to a couple of different countries. He starts in Italy, where he's based out of. He goes to the Italian government and says, hey, give me some money. Give me a couple ships. I'll sail west. I'll bring a bunch of stuff back. Everybody will be rich. And the Italian government says, well, we don't really have the money. We're going to pass. Then he goes to one of the kingdoms in Spain. He says, hey, or excuse me, he goes to one of the kingdoms in Germany. Says, hey, give me some money. Give me some ships. I'll sail west. I'll get a bunch of cool stuff. And the German kingdom says, no, we can't. We don't have the money. Then he goes to Spain. He says, hey, Spain, give me a bunch of money. I'll sail west. I'll bring back a bunch of cool stuff. We'll all make money. And Spain says, sure, we'll give you like $1,000. We'll give you 3 of our worst ships that are falling apart and go knock yourself out. Best case scenario, you come back with a bunch of cool stuff and we all make money and then we buy a round of drinks. Or like worst case scenario for you, I guess, you get eaten by an ocean monster and then we're not really out a lot of money. It's a win-win, right? So in August of 1492, Columbus gets an official commission from the Spanish government to find a trade route by sailing west to find the Indies and Asia. Columbus kind of more broadly believes that the earth is smaller than it is. As we're going to see, he's going to run into some land that he and a lot of Europeans did not know about. But in September of 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. He sails sort of south from Europe to the Canary Islands, where he takes on a bunch of supplies and food, and then he goes west. In October, he lands on an island in the Bahamas. We don't know exactly where that was, but he believes that he's now in what were called the Spice Islands of India. So what that means is, at the time at least, Europeans thought that there were all these islands surrounding India, and each island had different spices. So he goes onto this island. He says, I'm in India. I claim this for Spain. Bring me all your cool spices. He stays a couple days on that island, gets to know some of the people there, gets back on his ship with his crew and his 2 other ships, sails around for 2 more weeks, runs into another island that is probably the island of Cuba, believes he's now in China. And at this point, he has to stay longer because he actually ran into the island, tore a giant hole in one of his ships. So he's going to spend about 3 weeks, maybe a month or so, on this island. But again, believing he's in China. He eventually gets his ship repaired, gets back on, takes with him a couple of native people, and a bunch of sugar cane. He knows it's something, doesn't realize that it's sugar, but knows it's a spice. He refers to it as a spice. He sails back to Europe, is hailed as a hero, and gets sent back 3 more times. Never making landfall in North America. The closest he gets is some of these islands, like right off the coast of Florida. So he doesn't make it to North America. He doesn't discover America. But I mean, then that kind of brings in the question, like, well, could he even have discovered anything? Because there's already people there, right? He didn't discover anything. But he obviously doesn't make it to Asia or India or any of that. But he goes to his deathbed thinking he did. So why is this such a big deal? Columbus opens the door for others. Good or bad, this will kind of spark interest in this region, and eventually lead to other explorers saying, oh, well, there's more islands, or there's this land mass, this Florida, or eventually there's this huge continent that we didn't know existed. So Columbus kind of in and of himself isn't that important. What he did was not that significant, but what kind of follows after that perhaps is. But what I want to really kind of key into here our kind of third bullet point here is, what is Columbus interested in? And we can look at that by studying entries from his diary that he kept during this first voyage. So here's where I'm going to kind of sit back for a second, where you get to participate a little bit. I want to read two sections from his diary. He's describing an island that he calls Fernandina. We don't know exactly where this island was. But what I want is for one of you to read this, and then we'll kind of pick apart what Columbus is saying. And just kind of warning here, this is going to happen just about every class. I like to get you involved. Frankly, I need to rest my voice sometimes. And this kind of breaks up the monotony of me all the time. So can I get somebody to read this for us? If nobody volunteers, I'll pick somebody.
Sure, I will.
Okay, go for it.
The island is green, level and fertile to a high degree, and I doubt not that grain is sowed and reaped the whole year round. I saw many trees, and such a diversity was among them that it was the greatest wonder in the world to behold. One branch of a tree bore leaves like those of a cane, another branch of the same tree, leaves of a different kind. In this manner, a single tree bears 5 or 6 different kinds. Nor is this done by grafting. These trees grow wild, and the natives take no care about them. They have no religion, and I believe that they would very readily become Christians.
I was muted. I was saying, wait, stop.
Oh,
That's okay. It's okay. So just this first part. So let's kind of marinate in this for a minute. Just from this first paragraph that ends single tree bearing 5 or 6 different kinds. What kind of stuff is Columbus talking about? I don't want the like underlying motivation, none of that. Just what is he describing to us in this excerpt? What's the stuff he's seeing?
Is it the sugar cane that you were talking about him finding? Maybe?
Yeah, he does talk about sugar cane. He says one branch on this tree bore leaves of a cane, like maybe a sugar cane. What else is he describing? What else does he talk about on this island? Kobe.
The ability of the land to like farm and stuff on the land.
Yeah, he says it's fertile to a high degree, meaning you can like grow a lot of stuff. What else does he describe?
The island is very green.
Yeah.
Like the terrain is different.
Yeah, it's very green and kind of tropical, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe another way to describe it. He said it's flat. Let me ask this. Has anybody been to Florida?
Me.
Who's
Yeah.
me?
Miami, Tyler.
Tyler. Have you been there like a lot? Did you grow up there?
I had family that used to live down there, and we used to go down there and see them all the time in Orlando and Miami.
Okay. So, Tyler, what is Miami, Florida like? Better question. How does Miami, Florida compare to East Tennessee?
It's a lot hotter down there.
Mm-hmm.
It's more tropical than it is here in Tennessee. A lot of palm trees, a lot of beaches, and a lot of it's a very tropical place. That's all I can basically say about it. That's all I ever did down there was go to the beach. It's very tropical.
Yeah, there's beaches. It's tropical. There's palm trees everywhere. I think there are a couple of people with their hands up. Kobe, maybe.
Actually, I don't know how to put my hand down.
Okay.
Oh, I see mine.
Okay, cool. So Florida is pretty different from East Tennessee. My wife's grandmother lives in Fort Myers. That's sort of central western Florida. And like every time we've gone to visit her, I'm just like, oh my God, it's so green. And there's stuff growing everywhere, and there's mold everywhere. And it's like the polar opposite of East Tennessee. It's very flat, if you've ever been to Florida. It's very swampy in some places. It's very moist, which is a word I hate. A student in my other class said it's like walking through soup sometimes. It's so humid. It's like the opposite of Tennessee, of East Tennessee. And that's kind of what Columbus is saying. He's coming from Italy or Spain, sort of northern central Europe. It's mountainy in some places. It's cold certain times of the year. And this island is the total opposite of that. It's green, it's lush, stuff grows all year round. There's all kinds of different plants that grow everywhere. It's the opposite of where he's from. Okay, so Kobe, you have your hand up.
What time of the year did he show up in these islands?
This probably, he leaves in October, so maybe November-ish, December even. I don't know the exact day or date, but it would have been winter in Europe or fall at least. So he's describing this very kind of flat, fertile, lush place. The next entry, he continues talking about the trees on this island, but then he goes on to talk about the native people. Could somebody read this for us, please?
I'll read it, I guess, then.
Go for it. Oh, I just closed my screen. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Go for it.
Nor is this done by grafting. These trees grow wild, and the natives take no care about them. They have no religion, and I believe that they would very readily become Christians.
Okay. So he talked about the trees earlier and said there's on one branch, there's leaves of like 5 or 6 different types that all grow on the same branch. And then here he's sort of continuing that thought. He says it's not done by grafting, right? Meaning you're not like taking part of a plant and sticking it together and like tying it together so they grow together. He says they just grow like that, just naturally. But then he starts to talk about the native people. How does he say that the native people take care of all these plants and these trees and these things that they have?
They don't.
Somebody said they don't, right? He says, Columbus says the natives don't take no care about these plants, right? So they're not doing anything with them. They're just growing wild and all over the place. What else does he say about the native people? Amanda has her hand up.
Basically that he thinks they could be persuaded easily to conform to basically being a Christian and seeing his values.
Yeah. So not only can they be easily converted, but they have no religion at all. So we could just kind of graft it onto them, so to speak. Okay, so just in this kind of isolated selection, again, we go back to this question. What is Columbus, and then by extension the Spanish government, because that's who's giving him the money and the ships and all of the supplies, what are they interested in? Or what is he saying Spain should be interested in? Why should they even care about all these bunch of islands he's landing on? What's of value? What's valuable on these islands? What could be valuable on these islands?
The grain that's growing there.
Yeah, the plants or the things that are growing there. I see. Was that Kobe?
Yeah, I was going to say they can grow stuff there and they can convert people to Christianity.
Yeah, you can grow stuff, not just like any old stuff, anything you want year round, right? So it's not just like land for land's sake. It's, again, we go back to that motivator. the motivation for a lot of these countries, if we go all the way back here, spices, right? You could theoretically grow pepper or mace or star anise or cinnamon on these islands. That stuff doesn't grow well in Europe. And you can grow year round. You don't have to wait 6 months or 12 months to go and harvest something. You just constantly plant and plant and plant and have like unlimited amounts of spices. Or we could convert people. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later, the kind of religious aspect of European colony building. So again, this all kind of circles back to that beginning bullet point. What are the valuable resources? How can we get them quicker, easier, cheaper? And in this case, Columbus is saying, well, how could we produce them on our own? Okay. Questions about sort of Columbus or these ideas about what he is interested in particular, or just questions really broadly? No. Okay. Let me check on the time. Got about 15 minutes or so. So let's turn next to, we're going to look at the Aztecs. So we kind of leave Europe here on the verge of colony building. And let's turn to the Aztec in Central America. And eventually, we're going to bring these two groups together, specifically Spain and the Aztec people. So when we're talking about native groups, we really can't cover every single native group. That would take forever. So I'm going to use the Aztecs in Central America as sort of our case study in Central America. So let's talk a little bit about what we know about the Aztecs. We know that we don't have a very firm founding date for their society. Probably the first decade or so of the 1200s is when they first existed. Almost certainly they existed before that. We just don't have records earlier than 1200. But according to their own kind of mythical founding story, the Aztecs say that they were this group of wandering tribes that eventually settled and built a capital city on Lake Texcoco in Central America. So if we look at a map here, this lake that is going to be here is where they will literally build their capital city of Tenochtitlan. But let's kind of pull away from the mythical sort of history of this. What we do know is that before 1500, the Aztec Empire is really not an empire. It's not this big kind of mass with a single capital. It's this scattered collection of what we'd call city-states. If any of you have taken an early world history class especially, you've probably heard this term. But can we kind of come up with a definition? Does anybody know what a city-state is? No. Okay. Silence means no. So a city-state is basically a city that functions as its own country. So in the case of the Aztecs, they might all have shared the same language and maybe some of the same religious beliefs, but each city had its own leader, its own laws, maybe even its own dialect of the Mexica language. But we'd still call them the same society because there's so many similarities in these little individual city-states. So that's the Aztecs pre-1500. Around 1500, they become the single unified society with a capital city, with a single leader, and eventually look more like a monarchy than anything else. So let's touch on that for a minute. What is this kind of structure of Aztec society?
Out
But
of curiosity,
oh yeah,
could you classify like Rome as a city state? Like
Rome.
during during the Holy Roman Empire?
Well, okay. So Rome goes through. Well, okay. Big giant asterisks here. I'm not an ancient historian. I'm not very knowledgeable about ancient Rome, but I know that Rome goes through these periods of kind of scattered city states and then a big giant empire and then collapse. So yes, certain parts of Roman history are this kind of city state model. Ancient Greece is probably more similar to a city state system than anything else. But the Holy Roman Empire is a lot later. We're going to touch on the Holy Roman Empire a little bit, maybe later today, maybe next week. So I don't know if that answered your question. I also don't know who was talking.
It was Jacob.
Okay.
And it answered my question.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what is the society like? First off, terminology is important. So Aztec is the term the Spanish give these people. It's what they refer to them as. What they call themselves are Mexicas, basically people of Mexico. So we'll kind of come back to this a few times, this idea of like what's a European term and then what do they actually call themselves. Similarly, once the Aztec or the Mexica are this kind of unified society, they have what we could call a king or maybe an emperor. But even that, again, is a European kind of thinking of it, right? What the Mexica call their leader is their great speaker, meaning he speaks for everybody. He's not necessarily above all of us, although functionally he was, but he's just the guy that kind of speaks for everybody. But even that is still going to be kind of different from a king, a kind of monarchy you'd see in Europe. The emperor has kind of an assistant who is usually a female who will govern if he can't govern. And he is elected for a lifetime term by a group of elders. Below the emperor are, again, what the Europeans would call the nobility. They hold a variety of government jobs or military positions, even down to like local governors of a village would be kind of grouped into this nobility group. But they're not like nobility in Europe. Nobility for the Aztec comes from their bloodline or their connection to the great speaker, not because of some kind of social position they have or money that they might have. Okay, so you've got what we're kind of seeing as a hierarchy, like a pyramid sort of shape, right? So we've got our speaker at the top. I'm trying to get this in the camera. Speaker at the top, nobility below that. Then we've got basically everybody else. What, again, the Europeans would call commoners, but the Aztec probably wouldn't call that. This group is going to be made up of certain families. By the time the Spanish make contact, there are 20 prominent families in Aztec society, and they all claim their lineage back to the original families that founded the empire. So if you're in one of those families, one of those 20 families, you have certain rights and privileges. If you don't, you're called Mayake, and you don't have certain rights and certain privileges. So we already have this kind of delineation among this third group, this commoner group. You're either in a family group, in one of those original founding families, or you're not. Okay. I just fire hosed you with a lot of information. Are there questions at this point about the kind of role the emperor plays, the nobility, commoners? Kobe has his hand up.
Do we need to remember all these terms for a test or anything?
That is, everything is fair game on a test. Definitely
Okay.
a good idea. This PowerPoint is up on Brightspace, so feel free to take notes with that. But yeah, I mean, I haven't written the tests yet, so I don't know what's going to be on the test. But everything is fair game here. Okay, other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
So the first quiz is on the 13th, right? Quiz one.
You broke up a whole lot. I heard something
And then the
first.
second quiz is quiz.
Shane.
He's
Hey,
asking
Shane,
if
I can barely hear you, Shane.
He's asking if the quiz is due on the 13th or not.
Okay. So super quick, Shane, I muted you not because I hate you, but because your audio is breaking up a whole lot. I will unmute you in a second, but the first quiz is going to be on the 13th now. There's some problems with the textbook. I want to give everybody ample time to get the textbook. So the first quiz is pushed back to the 13th. If you've already done it, then you're good to go. Okay, but back to the PowerPoint. Are there questions about any of these three groups that that we've covered so far? Okay, so at the bottom of the society, we have slaves. But again, slavery in kind of the European model is very different from what we'd see with the Mexicas. Slaves in the Aztec Empire make up a pretty small percentage of the population, about 2% of the population. But they're relatively well cared for. Their owners kind of adopt them in a way. But, that being said, slaves have very little freedom of movement. They can't just pick up and leave and decide to not do their job or their kind of owner's task. But they do have certain rights. Slaves can eventually own slaves. Slaves are considered citizens of the Aztec Empire because they're kind of adopted by whatever family owns them. Slaves, in fact, have more rights than the Mayaque do. So this is a very different kind of definition than you might see in the European model. One other big difference is that slavery is not hereditary for the Aztecs. So if a slave has a child, that child does not become a slave in this kind of system. So there are some differences, right, between the kind of European model that we might be familiar with and this sort of society that we see with the Aztecs. But it's not that different. It's not, some kind of crazy system where, children rule and dogs have voting rights or something. It's similar to Europe with some changes. And it wouldn't have been that foreign of an idea to, let's say, the Spanish. So that kind of begs the question, why are the Spanish so weirded out by the Aztecs? And I would argue, not necessarily asking for an answer, I would argue that religion is probably the biggest, the thing that in the minds of Europeans makes the Aztecs so much different, so much other than Europe. So I want to spend the last 5 or 10 minutes or so talking about religion in the Aztec Empire. Questions, though, at this point about the kind of structure of this society? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about religion let's talk about the capital city as well. So the capital of the Aztec Empire, this city, Tenochtitlan, I poked my screen, is built on a lake. So there's these kind of roads connecting back out to the main portion of land in Central America. And it's, designed like kind of any other city. You have a sort of central business area, business district here in the middle. This is where you have religious buildings, government buildings, businesses, and then all of these surrounding areas are residential for the most part. If we look a little closer at our capital, there are two main temples in this city. This first one here is to the sun god. Make a little sun there. The other temple is to their moon goddess. And that was the nature of most cities in the Aztec Empire. They have temples to a specific god, and the belief was that that god lives there. So if we go a little bit further into the kind of mythos of the Aztecs, they will claim that their capital city was essentially chosen by their sun god. This god, Quetzalcoatl, and the kind of story surrounding that is epic. The story surrounding him and the founding of this capital city is that his mother was pregnant with him, his mother being the earth goddess, and his two siblings were super jealous of this new baby. So they want to kill the mother and the baby so that they don't have this rival sibling anymore. So they're gonna conspire to kill their unborn brother, and he finds out about it. Don't worry about how. It's not important. He finds out somehow, and emerges fully formed as an adult human being out of his mother with a giant flaming serpent, and that's what this is in the picture. It's a snake that he's holding, this blue snake-looking thing. So he emerges fully formed with this flaming serpent, and he cuts off the head of both of his siblings and then points down to earth and says to the Aztec people, "This is where you're gonna live." And then they build their capital city there. So that's a heck of a cool, badass sort of creation story. But that's the kind of iconography surrounding Quetzalcoatl. He's got a snake in almost every image of him, and then he is also the god of that controls their sun. So he usually has this disc that he's either holding or sometimes it's above his head, and he is one of many, many, many gods in this society. So we can say that the Aztecs are polytheistic, right? They have many gods. So let's look at two more, because I really like Aztec mythology and Aztec gods. One of the other gods, Totec, pictured here, is referred to as the god of filleted flesh. He is a god connected to birth and death and the rebirth cycle. This also applies to agriculture. And one of the stories connected to him is that he was looking down on earth one day and he saw that all the people, the Aztecs, were starving because they didn't have enough food. So he comes down to earth and he says, "Hey, what's wrong?" And they say, "Well, we can't grow anything. The earth won't let us grow corn and all the food we need." So out of this kind of self-sacrifice, Totec takes a big knife, which you see in his left hand here, and basically cuts off his arm skin and his leg skin, and that's what these cool sort of flappy things are here hanging off of him. He basically skins himself and buries that in the ground, and then that fertilizes the earth so that the Aztecs could grow food. And in commemoration of that, in this kind of Christ-like story, in commemoration of that, the Aztecs will sacrifice a person to kind of commemorate that. The most common way they do that would be through the arrow sacrifice ceremony, where they tie a person up to a stake and shoot a couple of dozen arrows into that person, and then they bleed out into the soil in commemoration of what this god did for all of us. Okay, that's really intense. Other gods are a little bit less bloody. We have a female goddess, Chalitlichku. She is the goddess of rain and water and rivers and childbirth. So if you're a pregnant mother, you'd pray to this goddess so that you have a healthy child. And usually something offered to her would not be a human sacrifice, it would be food. So maybe a little piece of tortilla or some wheat, we'd burn that to send it up to that goddess. Okay, so we have all of this kind of pantheon of gods, many of which have this human sacrifice component. And then that really begs the question, well, how exactly do you choose somebody to be sacrificed? And that's where I'm going to leave you on this cliffhanger. Who is going to get sacrificed and how do you choose that person? We'll pick up with that next week. A couple of things, though, before I let you go. Next week, we're only going to meet on Thursday. I want to evaluate how far we get in that class. I think we might need some extra time, so I might add like a half an hour on Tuesdays. I'm going to give you at least a week notice for that, so if you do need to change around your schedule, you can do that. But let's kind of see where we are after next week. Reminder that the date for the first discussion is moved. So that first discussion and that first quiz, if we go back to Brightspace, is going to be on the 13th. Again, apparently there's been problems with the bookstore and ebook and kind of technical issues. So the first discussion, the first quiz is pushed back to Sunday 13th at midnight. Other thing to let you know about, next Monday is Labor Day. So that is a federally and a state recognized holiday. That means that if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you should not have class on Monday. And maybe more importantly, campus, a lot of facilities on campus will be closed as well. So just kind of heads up about that. Beyond that, I'm going to let y'all kind of scatter to the wind. I do have office hours right after this. If you want to hop on there and ask questions, I'll be on in a couple minutes. But until then, have a good rest of your week and have a good weekend. I'll see you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.